Lech-Lecha. With these words, God calls upon Avraham to embark on a journey. The literal meaning of the words Lech-Lecha is Lech, go, Lecha, to you. Lech-Lecha, go to you. There is a profound teaching of the Zohar based on the literal meaning of these words. The Zohar teaches that the journey that Avraham undertakes is not only geographical, but spiritual. A journey to discover his inner self. Rav Kook teaches that if a person succeeds in this journey, the place where he meets his true self, that is where he will discover the divine. In a passage entitled The Search for the Self, Rav Kook begins by homiletically explaining the opening verse of the book of Yechezkel. And I was in exile. Rav Kook explains this as being an existential statement. The I, the inner self, is in exile. A person has lost touch with his inner self. And Rav Kook sees this disconnect as going back to the story of the Garden of Eden. In that story, the snake seduces Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. Rav Kook explains this as the sin resulted in listening to an external voice, the voice of the snake, and not to the truth inside of them. Rav Kook ends this passage very dramatically by quoting the biblical phrase, Ani Hashem, I am God, and explaining that too homiletically as meaning that the I, the inner self, is an expression of the divine inside of us, an expression that humanity is created in the divine image. The spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle once said that the formative moment in his life came when he said to himself, I can't live with myself. And suddenly he realized that inside of him there's more than one identity. I can't live with myself. There's the I, there's the myself. They're not getting along. And the question is, which one of them is truly me? And from that question, he began his search. Now, the search for the self and the belief of the connection between the inner self and the divine is not unique to Judaism. This is also a prominent feature in Eastern spirituality. However, sometimes by comparing the similar, we could ultimately highlight that which is unique. And there is in fact a second teaching of the Zohar relating to the words Lech-Lecha. In the second teaching, the Zohar sees Lech-Lecha as God addressing the soul. The soul is still in its original habitat in the world of spirit, and God tells the soul, the time has come, you must leave your natural habitat and go down into the physical, material world. And this journey is not viewed by the Zohar as being a punishment to the soul, but rather a mission for the soul to achieve its purpose, to lead to the uplifting and sanctification of the physical, material world. In the past, we've spoken about the great East-West divide as is the major impulse in life, the doing or the being, and of Judaism as a forging together of these two impulses. The two teachings of the Zohar, respectively, teach us each focus on one of these aspects. The first, the search for the inner self, focuses on the being, whereas the second teaching focuses on the doing. Eastern spirituality focuses on the being, on the search for the inner self, but often this is at the expense of neglecting the external world. In fact, the external reality is considered to be Maya, which means an illusion. And the soul tries to escape this illusion. Judaism sees that the soul came here with a purpose, not to escape the world, but to rectify it, to uplift it. I would like to share with you a story about what happens when only one of these two impulses, only one of these two meanings of Lech-Lecha is followed. When I was in India, I first heard the story of Vijayananda, the 92-year-old guru who is the head of one of India's largest ashrams. I learned that Vijayananda is not his original name. Vijayananda's real name is Rabbi Yakov Nagen, the son of a rabbi from France. And one day I went to visit him to learn what was it that took him so far from home. And Vijayananda, Avram Yaakov, told me his story. When he grew up, he lost his faith, he became an atheist. But one day he read a book of Indian philosophy and the ideas that the divine is not only in the heavens, but within life, within the soul, so much captivated him that he felt he has to learn more about this. But at the same time, he was a fervent Zionist. And when the War of Independence broke out, he volunteered for the Haganah. However, the person in charge of recruiting for the Haganah in the city of Marseille did not take him. He later discovered this was because the person was a friend of his family's and thought the family would be upset at him if his son would go to too far from home to the faraway land of Palestine. Therefore, he decided to take on a different journey, and he went on a boat to India. Unlike the original Avraham, who answered the Lech-Lecha to the land of Israel, he took the Lech-Lecha for a spiritual search. He arrived in India, joined an ashram, and that's where he's been for the last 55 years. When I came into his room, I saw that on his bookcase there were a number of works of Jewish spirituality. The Sfat Emet, the Tanya, a book of Hasidic stories by Simcha Raz. And he told me that later in life he discovered that so much of what brought him to India, he later realized appears in Judaism itself. It made me feel the tragedy of so many of those who we have lost, who went to search things not realizing that what they searched for is inherent in Judaism itself. I asked him, "You've been 55 years in this ashram. What have you learned?" And he told me that he feels there's more than one way to get to the top of the mountain. However, if somebody switches paths in the middle, he's not going to get to the top. And therefore you should stick to one path based on your tradition. What he said was reminiscent of a saying that to get to the water, you have to dig deep. And the problem with so many searchers, they're digging so many shallow holes that they never get anywhere. And this, I think, is a critique of a lot of modern spirituality, in particular, the New Age, which is very eclectic, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and that explains why so few get where they want to go. And relating to Vijayananda himself, certainly someone who spends 55 years in the same place cannot be accused of switching paths too often. However, I thought, what did he mean to tell me when he added, you should pick the path based on your tradition? And I felt I have to go back and discover, was he trying to tell me, share with me the regrets about the path that he did not take? So I came back a second time, and when I came back, there was a traffic jam, so when I arrived, I only had 5 minutes to be with him till I had to leave again. We looked at each other knowing this is the last time we'll meet. And then he made his request. He asked me, when you make it back to Jerusalem, go to the Kosel and pray for me. 4 years later, I was told that he passed away, and I was forwarded a copy of the letter that the ashram put out, telling about his death. The letter that told about his very unusual last request. In India, holy men are cremated. His request to the ashram would be to allow him to forgo the usual rites and instead to allow him to be buried. Vijayananda chose to die as Avram Yaakov, as a Jew. Shabbat Shalom.